Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Hit. Got some Tarkov news today. I wasn't sure if I was going to cover this at first. Stuff was evolving so quickly, but it seems things have more or less come to a point where there's not going to be a lot more going on, and so it seems a good time to hop in and talk a bit about all of the controversy that's been going around the last couple of days for Tarkov. A lot of community members also been asking me if I was going to make a video about this, and so I was like, okay, well, why not? We'll take a peek and see what's going on. So I've done a reasonable amount of research. I've read a bunch of articles. I've watched some videos trying to get a grasp on things. There's a lot going on here, a fair amount of moving parts. So if I don't get everything right, I apologize. But I'll do my best to nail this as best as possible. So before I start, I'll realize that perhaps not everyone knows what Tarkov is all about. They probably, some of you probably haven't played it. Many of you might not even know what the game is. But Escape from Tarkov is a niche game in a niche genre of sorts, despite its relatively large size and its commanding presence in that niche genre. It's like a hardcore extraction shooter in a PvP environment, although that is changing to a degree, which we will get into pretty shortly here. That's kind of what it is. And it leans into almost a milsim category of this genre. And so you'd think, man, I mean, that's a pretty niche market. I want to say niche a few more times, but it is. It's what it is. I don't know any other words to use. It's a niche market. So there can't be that many players. Au contraire, Tarkov is very popular. Not just in terms of playing, but also in the content creation space. A lot of YouTubers and Twitch streamers and whatnot have been very involved in this game for many years now. But with all that involvement, and it is a very dedicated community. I mean, one of the most dedicated, perhaps to a fault. The recent announced version of Tarkov has kicked up quite a fuss, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So to kind of lay the groundwork for what's going on here, until I think it was January of this year, if I'm not mistaken, and you'd think I'd have this in my notes, but I forgot to add it. But I believe it was January of this year, there was an edition of Tarkov called Edge of Darkness Edition, EOD. And this edition was kind of like an, I don't know if you could call it an early adopters option, but it behaved in a similar fashion in that it was $150, so not cheap, $150, came with several in-game perks as well as the promise of all future DLC and battle passes, or season passes, whatever they were calling them, on the house. You're spending all this money up front. Thank you for that. Here's your gift, as it were. And I'm sure there have been other games that you can think of that have done similar things in the past, especially in a live service environment. I think of like Smite, for example, where for a long time you could pay for an edition that ensured that you got every subsequent character that was produced for that game. So there's precedent for this kind of thing, for example. According to many of the more veteran players, though, and this was an interesting thing that I think is an interesting, well, not just interesting, but important piece of this puzzle, is that a lot of the veteran players I saw talking about this in the last couple of days mentioned that EOD was an incredibly popular edition of the game, with some stating that they've had many times in which it was more common for them to see an EOD paying player in the lobbies than it was a non-paying EOD player, which gives you an idea that there are a ton of people that have spent $150, more than likely, not just because of the great bordering on pay-to-win stuff that came with that edition, but also the idea that, hey, I put my $150 in, I don't need to worry about stuff that comes out in the future, it's going to be covered. Now, the Unheard Edition is the new edition of the game that is, since they stopped the EOD edition from being purchasable, it's kind of its replacement, the Unheard Edition. This was announced in that it was, and where this controversy is coming from, when they announced this thing, they announced it as the only way for players to be able to play a supported co-op PvE edition of the game, or mode of the game, which went over about as well as you'd expect. being a primarily PvP online game, there were a lot of players over time that were interested in having kind of an offline edition of the game. They thought it would be just as fun for them without having to go up against, hardcore lobbies or perhaps cheaters and whatnot. That is unfortunately a known problem for Tarkov. And there is a mod that allows you to do this. However, that mod apparently or reportedly can get your account banned. And if you've spent $150 on the game, then by God, you probably don't want to have your account banned for that very reason. That's an expensive ban. And so this Unheard Edition coming with a supported PvE mode is huge, except that it is paywalling that very mode. Now you're thinking, okay, well, the EOD was $150 and this is replacing it, so clearly it's probably also $150. You're wrong. It's $250. $250. That pause was for dramatic effect, but also I was listening to what my better half was doing upstairs. I was very confused. I didn't know if she was singing again or what, but she's just talking to family. Nevertheless, $250. Now, I understand that in the grand scheme of things, in a live service game where people spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours in these games, $250 is kind of whatever. But that's the psychology behind paying $250 one time versus paying $250 over the course of several months. Totally different ballgame, right? And so $250 upfront, paywalling a PvE mode, not going over well, like going over like a lead balloon kind of a situation. Now, more than that, of course, this has pay-to-win aspects similar to that of EOD. Some of them, this is not an exhaustive list, just, you can use your imagination a bit, and it's not all that important here per se, but here's some of the more major ones. Primarily, the edition was announced to provide players with no lost progression for characters, unique weapons, or they got unique weapons, more flea market slots, and an increased starting level after server wipes, which is particularly potent in a game that, server wipes are supposed to help keep everyone from getting too out of control and just stopping new players coming into the servers. Perhaps the most wild bit is that as UE, which is the Unheard Edition, reportedly changes your reputation with fences, and I don't mean what you put between you and your neighbors so that you don't have to listen to their dog as frequently. Scavs won't shoot at you. We're talking fences as in the guys that you are. I got ahead of myself here, but fences after making a bad joke. Fences as in the guys and gals that you'd be selling stolen goods to. That kind of a fence. Scavs, and if you don't know what that is, it's the bots that are on the maps, that are populating the maps in certain zones. It's not just other players. Scavs won't shoot at you first if you're over 60 meters away, which basically means you're paying to not get shot as much, which is about as close to paying to win as one could possibly get. As far as I'm concerned, paying players will also be able to send out their to their friends list, like a friend list wide notification in sort of like a flare form in their game, to bring those friends in to their raid when they're in trouble, which is also a pretty good thing to have handy. So again, this also all went over about as well as you would imagine, which is to say not well at all. The primary issue, of course, with this was that the EOD paying players never expected to have to pay for anything like this. They were told for the longest time that all DLC, season passes and whatnot, you're good. You're covered. You're getting all this stuff, but now they're expected to pay. I don't believe they were expected to pay the full $250. I believe they got a discounted thing where it was like you were paying for the difference, so maybe $100 or so. But it's possible, perhaps, when this first broke, that they were expected to pay the full amount. I'm not 100% sure. Nevertheless, people were saying, "What? I'm paying for this? I don't think so. I'm part of the EOD crew. I should be getting this for free 99." But they weren't. So eventually, after a lot of players kicking up a fuss about this, and rightfully so, it would elicit a response from the developer, the lead community manager, who I'm going to say is Daniel M, because the last name Wolf, I'm not cultured enough to be able to pronounce that last name. took to the community Discord to say, and this is a quote, DLC means additional downloadable content. PvE is a feature and a game mode. Just because you all want it to become a DLC, it wouldn't mean it is one. It's a featured game mode for the new edition of the game, end quote. Yike! I mean, I get what he's saying, but that's not really a soft landing. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying, Vern? As the community continued to press them on it, players started to notice that further than all this other stuff going on, the developer had been removing or altering text on their website about what the Edge of Darkness edition would provide, presumably to help better fit the narrative that it was never meant to cover what's being released in the Unheard Edition. So on the website, of course, where it would be listing what that EOD came with, EOD edition came with, specifically, there was a part, if I'm not mistaken, I thought I had it here in my notes. Nevertheless, there were some specific parts that were referring to things like the arena, Escape from Tarkov arena, which, oh, here it is, found in my notes. So yeah, these alterations apparently include the line that states EOD players would be given access to Escape from Tarkov Arena. Now that's interesting because Arena was like a basically standalone thing, which you would think if there was anything, that would be the thing not included as DLC, but it was. And then this other stuff is not. And so it was causing a lot of extra confusion and frustration amongst the community. And that makes people, you know, between all these things happening, the even being brave enough to do this in the first place, changing stuff on the websites, being wishy-washy about what is and isn't DLC, etc., trying to almost frame Unheard Edition as its own standalone thing to try to like help that narrative, etc., all of this stuff culminates in people just having very little faith in them. And so it does seem like you know, that seems like the logical line that BSG is trying to draw here, Battlestate Games. The next day, with pressure continuing to ramp up, Battlestate Games announced that they would be walking back some of these changes. Then again, all this happened in like 72 hours. I mean, this was moving. This was moving. So the updated plan meant that, and I'm saying meant because it's changed again, meant that EOD owners would then be able to get access to some more features. I have a list of what they had here on a few websites that were reporting this. Faster return of insured items, increased personal trader buying limits by 20%, increased basic PMC karma when it would be implemented, access to unique hideout craft, increased basic charisma skill, special quest line with increased pockets size, I want to say it's size, although it was written as side, as a reward, ability to skip 2 daily quests per day free of charge, unique dog tag, unique armband, unique set of clothing, unique legacy device, high priority matching for EOD owners for 6 months, and access to offline PvE for EOD owners for 6 months. Now, for those of you who are folding clothes, walking the dog, or just aimlessly wandering around your house eating leftovers, those last couple of lines might have perked up your ears a little bit. High priority matching for EOD owners for 6 months, and access to offline PvE for EOD owners for 6 months. So they moved a bit, but they were saying, hey, it's only going to be for 6 months that you have access to this PvE mode. But stating high priority matching for EOD owners for 6 months confused people even more because I don't think people were necessarily, at least broadly or widely, aware that there would be any kind of priority going on with this thing, but now they've clearly stated that there are, or there is in fact priority. And so now people are saying, well, hey, what the hell does that mean for people that aren't buying into this thing? Like, you know, what are they, like, we go wait for 20 minutes to get into a match kind of a situation? Like, how bad is this going to be? And so that opened up a whole different can of worms. So again, that went over terribly. And a lot of players started seeing this as just kind of like a slap in the face because it was just getting silly. You know, they were moving quick, but they were, you know, it was kind of like just incremental, walk it back. Just being kind of obvious about how predatory may be a bit of a harsh word, but I think you understand that this is, you know, the way that they were operating here was not instilling a lot of confidence in their player base and their paying players. However, as of earlier today, And that's why I waited a bit to do this video, because I knew there'd be more coming, and there might still be after I post this. In an open letter from BSG, all EOD players will now be getting access to the PvE mode without the 6-month restrictions. So now you're just, the EOD players are just getting that. That being said, that's at launch of that mode. It's not the early access. If players want, even EOD players want early access, they're still going to have to pony up the extra bucks to get early access to that mode if they're particularly interested in it. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait, which is better than what they were getting before. So I don't think a lot of people were upset about that per se. It's just not ideal with how this is all being rolled out. I think that's kind of obvious at this point. Now, they did have more information that they didn't release earlier, which they explained that because the PvE side of things is still living on their servers, they don't have the infrastructure to have all EOD players playing the PvE mode at this time. I think this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, how many EOD players are there that their infrastructure can't handle the PvE stuff? And they all paid $150. I mean, man, this had to have been lucrative. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Damn, you don't have the infrastructure and you had people pay at $150? This is for the PvE mode? And of course, some players were saying, well, why don't you just make it so that it's not being hosted by you guys and it's P2P and that's, I'm not going to talk to that or speak to that because there are lots of reasons why a developer wouldn't want to go that route. Nevertheless, if you were going to make that the hidden reason that you weren't talking about before, I can understand why players were suddenly, maybe asking why that isn't the way that they would instead want to go. So that's kind of where it's at now, to my knowledge. So like my ending thoughts on this, especially as somebody that's like more or less from the outside in, because I don't play Tarkov, but it's clear Tarkov is in a pretty unique position. While there are, a handful of games that occupy this space, in this genre, Tarkov is, it is a niche of, there's a joke earlier, niche of a niche of a niche of a niche of a niche. I mean, it's the Russian nesting doll of niches as far as gaming is concerned. That being said, it's still wildly popular. And in fact, I mean, it's difficult. I will say this: it's difficult to get real numbers on this because. If you didn't know this, I mean, really, BSG is kind of like a shell company based in the UK with only one employee on the payroll, and then everything else is, to my knowledge, in Russia. And it's not on Steam, it's on its own client, etc. And so any information that we have is incredibly obscure or obfuscated. And so it's just very difficult to get real hard numbers. I think it's safe to say that some of the numbers floating around, there are some websites that state that they have active player counts. Some are stating somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 million active users per month. That seems like it would be reasonably realistic given the game's popularity in general, just in the gaming community. So I don't think that's wildly out of pace. So it's clearly a successful game. It's been doing well. It's been doing well for a long time. And so these kind of tactics, coupled with the knowledge that the community has traditionally been very forgiving of the developer up to this point and very diehard in nature, which comes with having such a, I keep saying the word, but comes with having such a niche game. Oftentimes you get very dedicated fan bases, right? So this seemed like an awful lot of abusing that relationship from the developer's side, unfortunately. That being said, for the sake of the community, hopefully this all gets sorted out in a way that everyone can be happy, at least as much as we could hope for that to be the case. That being said, though, even with the success of this game, something like this could mark kind of a downward turn for the game. Not to say that it could kill the game off per se, but it could mark the start of a downward turn for Tarkov. And when that happens, and when all this is going on, and you have a game that's in this kind of position, it can also signal to other developers that, hey, maybe there's some wiggle room here now. Maybe there's a spot for us to kind of work in here. And capture some of those players. Maybe there's an opportunity there. And so it's possible that what used to be a fairly comfortable spot with just BSG there by themselves, what used to be that could no longer be that for them because of these decisions. We'll have to wait and see. Nevertheless, that's all I've got for you today, guys. Hopefully that was relatively informative. If you haven't heard about it already, or at the very least a decent video to listen to in the background, hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're feeling particularly fancy, and of course, comments in the section below. What do you think about all this? Keep hitting the microphone cable back here. I'm sorry, I talk with my hands back here. What do you think about all this? What are your take on it? I'm sure many of you are actually Tarkov players. I'd be super interested in what your takes are specifically on this, but in general, love to hear comments on this whole deal. If you want to financially support this kind of content, patreon.com/criticalhit, spelled with a Q, just like here on the channel. And for articles, reviews, etc., that may or may not make it here in video form, if you'd like to read or just listen to, because I do voiceover for basically every article that I write, criticalhit.com is where you can do just that. And until the next video, guys, thank you very much. I appreciate you a great deal. Stay safe out there. And until next time, peace.